A judge silenced a teenage girl's prayer for her mom right in court, and within days, Pam Bondi had his authority stripped away. You won't believe what just unfolded. It was supposed to be a routine hearing, just another case on the calendar of a small-town courtroom, the kind no one ever pays attention to, but what happened that morning would shatter the illusion of justice and ignite a national reckoning. The air inside the courtroom was still, almost boring. A few parents shifted in their seats, waiting for the next name to be called. At the center of it all, Judge Lucas Brandt presided with a look of calculated detachment, his black robe pressed, his demeanor cold, a man who didn't speak unless he had to. He liked control. He lived by it. Then it happened. A teenage girl stood up quietly from the front row. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a folded piece of paper to her chest. She was no older than 15, with wide, tearful eyes, and a voice soft enough to get lost in the rustle of papers. But when she spoke, the entire courtroom froze. "Before we begin," she said, "may I pray for my mom?" A few heads turned. No one spoke. Her mother, sitting just a few seats behind her in a wheelchair, looked up with eyes full of silent gratitude. The girl closed her eyes and began to whisper a prayer. It was short, simple, a few words of hope. Then came the sound that changed everything. The gavel slammed. "Stop right now," Judge Brandt's voice sliced through the room like a blade. His face was red, fists clenched, eyes sharp with fury. "You will not pray in my courtroom," he said. The girl looked confused, shaken. "I didn't mean to—" "Stop," he cut her off. "This is a court of law, not a church. Bailiff, escort her out." Gasps erupted. The mother tried to speak, but the judge pounded the gavel again. The bailiff hesitated, then reluctantly walked over to the girl and gently took her arm. Her lips still trembling, she turned to her mom one last time before being led out. She was crying. And she wasn't the only one. No one moved, no one dared to speak, but the damage was already done. A woman in the back of the courtroom had recorded the entire thing. Her video, less than 30 seconds long, hit the internet like a firebomb. In 6 hours, it had over 2 million views. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Hashtags, outrage, news headlines screaming across screens nationwide. But while the world was just reacting, one woman was already moving. Pam Bondi didn't need to see the video more than once. The moment she watched that girl get escorted out of the courtroom for whispering a prayer, something inside her shifted. This wasn't about politics, this was about principle. And for Pam, that meant war. She packed a bag, boarded a red-eye flight, and landed in that small town with one goal: find the truth. And if that truth led where she thought it did, she wasn't going to leave quietly. What she would uncover in the next 72 hours would shake the very foundation of that courthouse and the man sitting on that bench. Judge Lucas Brandt would soon realize he wasn't the one holding the gavel anymore. But before we go any further, ask yourself this: what would you do if your child was punished for praying in public? And if you believe, even for a second, that justice should never come at the cost of faith, then stop and do this right now. Hit like so more people see this. Comment the number 9 if you believe prayer should never be silenced. And stay with us, because what happens next, no one saw coming. Pam Bondi was about to walk into that very courtroom, but she wouldn't be alone. In her hand was a folder thick with evidence, hidden emails, internal memos, testimonies that had been buried. And someone inside the system had decided it was finally time to speak. This wasn't just about one girl or one judge, this was about something much bigger, and it was just getting started. Pam didn't waste a second. The moment her boots hit the sidewalk outside the county courthouse, she knew something was off. There were no reporters, no police escorts, no protest signs, just a cold, quiet silence that didn't match the wildfire burning across social media. It was like the town wanted to forget the prayer incident had ever happened, sweep it under the rug, pretend none of it was real. But Pam Bondi wasn't built for silence, she was built for storms. Inside the courthouse, a clerk at the front desk looked up nervously when she saw Pam walk in. She recognized her instantly, everyone did by now, but instead of greeting her, the clerk shifted in her seat and avoided eye contact. "I'm here to observe," Pam said, sliding her ID across the counter. "Open session, correct?" The clerk nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, ma'am, but the judge's chambers aren't taking visitors. Pam raised an eyebrow. I'm not here to see his chambers. I'm here to see what he does in public. With that, she walked past the front desk and made her way to the main courtroom. Every step echoed. The building felt like a museum, frozen in time and fear. But as she turned the corner, she stopped. Sitting on a bench outside the courtroom door was a man in his 40s. He looked exhausted, his hands folded, his tie loose. Next to him sat a little boy, no more than 8 years old, clutching a crumpled paper cross he'd made out of notebook scraps. Pam approached slowly. "Is everything okay?" she asked. The man looked up. There was a pause, then something cracked in his voice. "They're inside now," he said. "My wife was cited last month for kneeling. She didn't say a word, just knelt beside our son while waiting for her case. Judge called it disruptive conduct." Pam knelt down beside the boy. "Oh, and you made that?" she asked, pointing to the paper cross. The boy nodded. "It's for her," he said, "to keep it close in case I get scared." Pam's jaw clenched. She stood, pulled out her notebook and asked the father to repeat every detail. He did, quietly, methodically. When he was done, she handed him her card and told him to call the moment the hearing ended. She wasn't going into that courtroom unprepared. By midday, Pam had already spoken to 3 different families who shared eerily similar stories. People cited, fined, threatened, all for acts of quiet, peaceful faith. And always in the same courtroom, always under Judge Lucas Brandt. One woman, a retired school nurse, had tears in her eyes as she told Pam she'd been removed from jury duty for wearing religious symbols. "It was just a silver necklace," she said, "a cross. I wasn't even thinking about it. He said it made me biased." Pam took it all down. Dates, names, docket numbers. She'd seen enough to know this wasn't a string of coincidences. It was a pattern. And patterns like this don't form without pressure from above. Back at the courthouse, something unexpected happened. A young woman, barely out of law school by the look of her, approached Pam in the hallway with her hands shaking. "You don't know me," she said, "but I clerked for Judge Brandt last year." Pam nodded. "Go on." The young woman took a deep breath. "He deletes bench memos," she whispered. "After rulings, after hearings, he makes sure there's no trace of why he made certain decisions. We were told not to question it, just file the final order." Pam narrowed her eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw what he did to that girl, and I saw what the world did with it. I thought no one would ever notice, but now they do." The clerk handed Pam a flash drive, everything I could save without being caught. Pam took it carefully, quietly, and just like that, the young woman was gone. Inside her rental car that evening, Pam plugged the drive into her laptop. Dozens of files popped up, some redacted, some half-finished, but one folder stood out. It was labeled simply, "Flagged Conduct." She opened it, and what she saw made her blood run cold. There were transcripts, private communications, draft orders where Brandt had scribbled notes about specific plaintiffs. One comment read, "Plaintiff is likely a religious zealot. Note behavior if signs of prayer appear." Another, even worse, "Witness wears Christian pin, maybe a plant." This wasn't bias, it was strategy, a deliberate, methodical purge of visible faith in his courtroom. And he was proud of it. Pam sat in silence, her eyes scanning every line, every red underline. This wasn't just about a rogue judge anymore. This was about a man who'd built a system around silencing those who dared to believe. And, tomorrow morning, she would be back in that courtroom, not as a guest, not as a lawyer, but as a woman with the truth in one hand and a nation behind her. Because when the system stops protecting the people have to protect themselves. And Judge Lucas Brandt was about to learn what that really meant. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. It wasn't louder, it wasn't more crowded, it was something else. Tighter, heavier, like the walls themselves knew something was coming. Judge Lucas Brandt entered his courtroom exactly at 9 a.m., just as he always did. Robe pressed, chin high. He didn't smile, he never did. His reputation was one of cold efficiency. No small talk, no delays, and absolutely no disruption. He tapped the gavel once. "This court is now in session." But before the first case could be read, the double doors at the back of the room creaked open. Every head turned. Pam Bondi walked in slowly, dressed in gray, professional but unshakable. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The moment she stepped through those doors, the air shifted. Lucas Brandt's eyes narrowed. He recognized her immediately. "You are not on the docket, Miss Bondi," he said flatly. Pam kept walking. She stopped just inside the courtroom rail. "I'm not here as an attorney," she said. "I'm here as a witness to something deeply wrong." The judge leaned forward. "This is not a press room. This is not a place for personal causes." Pam didn't flinch. "Then explain why families are being cited for kneeling, why mothers are being fined for wearing crosses, why transcripts are being altered, why bench memos disappear after rulings." Gasps rippled through the room. Brandt raised his voice. "You are dangerously close to contempt." Pam stepped forward, slowly, carefully, "and you are dangerously close to exposure." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick red folder. The room stilled as she placed it on the evidence table. In this folder are files recovered from a former clerk, notes, emails, prejudicial comments, and personal annotations proving consistent religious discrimination in this very courtroom. Judge Brandt's face froze. He looked at the folder like it was a lit stick of dynamite. Then he stood. "This is a farce, a coordinated stunt." Pam pointed to the gallery. "Tell that to the family sitting behind me, to the father whose wife was cited for kneeling, to the teenage girl who was thrown out of this courtroom for whispering a prayer." A murmur rolled through the seats. Phones were raised. The live stream had already started. Brandt slammed the gavel. "Security, remove her from the premises." But the bailiff didn't move. Pam turned slightly. "If this folder isn't true," she said, "why are you afraid of it being seen?" Brandt's mouth opened, but no sound came. Pam opened the folder. She pulled out a printed screenshot, a private memo dated 4 months ago. It read, "Plaintiff exhibits signs of religious affiliation, preemptively assign lower credibility." Another, even worse, "Minimize faith-based arguments, suggest plaintiff reframes claim on secular grounds. Flag for ideological bias." Gasps again, this time louder. A reporter whispered into a lapel mic, "Ladies and gentlemen, something historic is happening here." Brandt stepped back. "None of that is verified. Those could be fabricated." Pam looked him straight in the eye. "Then you won't mind if the full contents are submitted to the Judicial Oversight Board under oath with full subpoena power." Brandt's hands clenched on the bench. "Miss Bondi, you are turning this courtroom into a circus." Pam's voice dropped, steady as steel. "No, Judge. You did that the day you made faith a crime." At that moment, the doors opened again. 2 men entered. Dark suits, quiet shoes, badges from the Department of Justice. Brandt's face turned pale. "This is my courtroom," he snapped. One of the agents stepped forward. "And this is now a federal matter." The silence was total. Pam stepped back and let the moment hang in the air. It was rare to see a judge speechless, but in that moment, Lucas Brandt looked less like a man in control and more like a man exposed, unarmored, cornered. One of the reporters in the gallery turned and whispered, "If you're watching this right now, hit like so more people see it, and comment 9 if you believe prayer should never be punished." Phones buzzed. Streams blew up, and Lucas Brandt stood in the eye of the storm. He reached for his water glass. His hand trembled slightly. Then he looked at Pam. "You don't know what you've started," he said. Pam answered calmly, "Yes, I do. I started something that should have happened years ago." Then, for the first time since entering the courtroom, she smiled. It wasn't smug. It wasn't triumphant. It was the smile of someone who knew the truth had just broken through, and it wasn't going back underground. The agents approached the bench. "We'd would like to ask you a few questions in private chambers, Your Honor." Brandt didn't move. He just stared at the folder on the table, as if somehow that stack of paper had undone everything he thought was untouchable. Pam turned to the gallery. "This isn't over," she said. "This is only part 1. And with that, the judge who once silenced prayer now stood surrounded by silence himself. But this time, it wasn't obedience. It was reckoning. Lucas Brandt didn't say a word as he was escorted from the bench. The courtroom doors shut behind him with a finality that felt unnatural, like the closing of a tomb. Inside, the room stayed frozen. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. It was as if everyone was waiting to exhale, but didn't quite trust the air just yet. Pam remained standing. She looked at the now empty judge's bench, the towering symbol of unchecked authority that had, for years, decided the fate of anyone who entered, but now it sat hollow. The DOJ agents had taken the folder with them, and as the door clicked shut behind them, a second ripple began moving through the room. One that wasn't loud or dramatic, but carried weight. A quiet whisper from person to person. Someone finally stood up from the gallery, an older woman, maybe in her 70s. She was small, modestly dressed, clutching a worn leather Bible against her chest. "I never thought I'd live to see this," she said, her voice cracking. "I was thrown out of this same courtroom 2 years ago. They said I was intimidating the jury because I bowed my head." Someone else stood up, a middle-aged father. "My son wasn't allowed to speak in his own defense because he quoted a scripture during his testimony. Judge called it irrelevant to the facts." Another and another. It spread like fire. Voices that had been silent for so long now rose, one by one, not shouting, not ranting, but telling the truth, painfully, calmly, clearly. And Pam stood among them, just listening. For the first time, these people weren't invisible, they were witnesses, and what they had seen, what they had suffered, was no longer just rumor, it was record. By the end of the hour, every seat in the gallery had emptied, not from fear, but because everyone had followed Pam to the hallway, where reporters, photographers, and law clerks had begun to gather. The hallway had turned into something between a town hall and a press conference, and in the center of it all stood Pam, holding a microphone one of the reporters had handed her. "I didn't come here to make noise," she said. "I came here because when a courtroom becomes a place where faith is punished, silence is no longer an option." A few feet away, one of the DOJ agents returned. He leaned in and spoke quietly into Pam's ear. She listened, then nodded, and just like that, the calm was gone. Pam turned to the crowd. "There's more," she said. Everyone leaned in. She held up a second flash drive. This one didn't come from a clerk. It came from inside the clerk's server. Anonymous submission, but verified. It includes metadata on ruling drafts, timestamped document deletions, and something else. She paused. There's an internal memo from a private law association. It was sent to Judge Brandt 6 months ago. It outlines a strategy, a framework, their word, for reducing the visibility of religious practice in judicial spaces. A gasp. "They called it the quiet bench," Pam continued, "a playbook for judges who wanted to enforce secular dominance without drawing public scrutiny." The crowd was stunned. One reporter dropped their pen. "They didn't just want silence in court," Pam said. "They wanted control over language, over symbols, over what faith was allowed to look like. And they were willing to offer political rewards to judges who complied." She held the flash drive tightly. "This isn't just about Brandt anymore." Suddenly, from the back of the crowd, someone shouted, "So how deep does it go?" Pam looked up, then answered with one word, "nationwide." The hallway exploded. Reporters shouted questions, microphones pointed from every angle, phones shook in people's hands as they tried to capture every word. But Pam didn't flinch. "We're going to verify every document, every name, every email. And when we're done, we're not just filing a report." She paused. "We're going public." Suddenly, another DOJ agent rushed toward Pam. He whispered in her ear again. This time, his face looked off. Pam turned to him sharply. "Say that again." The agent nodded, grim. "Judge Brandt's gone." The hallway fell dead silent. "What do you mean gone?" Pam asked. "He was escorted to his chambers to await a preliminary interview 5 minutes ago. He slipped out a side entrance. Security lost track. His car is still here. He left on foot. We're checking surveillance now." Pam's eyes narrowed. "That doesn't make sense." The agent nodded. "Unless he knew something we didn't." And suddenly it clicked. He wasn't just a judge under fire. He was a man trying to disappear before something bigger got uncovered. Pam reached for her phone and dialed a number. "Get me federal field support. We need to lock down this courthouse and secure all digital access points. If he's running, it's not just about shame, it's about secrets." She turned to the crowd, to the live stream that was still rolling, and said one sentence that lit up every headline across the nation that hour. "This isn't just corruption. This is a system." And now it was unraveling. Pam didn't sleep that night. The courthouse had been locked down. Surveillance teams were combing nearby streets and transit stations, Federal agents were running searches, flagging Judge Brandt's name in every system from TSA to Amtrak. But by midnight, there was still no sign of him. No suitcase, no phone, no trace. He had simply vanished. Pam sat alone in the conference room at the temporary DOJ field office. The flash drives spread out before her like open wounds. She had gone through every folder, every memo, every draft ruling, and what she saw wasn't just bias, it was architecture. A deliberately built, quietly maintained system of judicial suppression. And Brandt had been just one pillar. Behind him were others. Names she recognized, names she didn't. Judges, attorneys, private legal advisors, political donors. There were signatures, offshore accounts, internal talking points on how to minimize religious presence without triggering lawsuits. And at the center of it all was one document, a memorandum from a DC-based legal foundation. It was labeled Confidential. Pam read the title out loud, barely a whisper. Judicial Harmonization Protocol. She leaned back in her chair, eyes burning from hours of reading. The words blurred together for a second. Her hands trembled slightly, because now she understood. This wasn't just a case, it was a war, and suddenly she felt very alone. There was a knock at the door. Agent Reyes stepped in, young, sharp, no nonsense. "We've traced Judge Brandt's last known location," he said. "Security camera caught him exiting a maintenance stairwell 23 minutes after the hearing. He left through a side door near the loading dock. No escort, no driver, on foot." Pam asked, "Car still in the garage?" Reyes nodded. "But there's more." He handed her a printed photo, grainy but clear. It showed Brandt walking quickly into a gray, unmarked vehicle. No license plates, no traffic record. "Looks like someone picked him up," Reyes said. "Whoever it was knew the timing perfectly." Pam stared at the photo. Someone's protecting him. Or protecting something bigger than him. Reyes said nothing. She didn't need him to, because in that moment she felt it. The fear. The real kind. Not the fear of losing a case, but the fear that she was standing at the edge of something deeper than she'd planned for. Something darker than anyone had warned her about. And that fear brought with it doubt. What if this got out of hand? What if going public wasn't just about exposing corruption, but tearing apart an entire system? Pam looked at the board behind her. Names, connections, timelines, all pinned with red string like a crime thriller come to life. She closed her eyes and remembered the girl, 15 years old, praying for her mother, thrown out like she was trash. Pam opened her eyes. The doubt didn't vanish, but it quieted. Because this wasn't about comfort, it was about conscience. She turned back to Reyes. "Then we find out who picked him up," Reyes nodded. "Already running the plates, but you need to see this too." He handed her another sheet. This one was from the digital forensics team. "We pulled this from Brandt's computer in Chambers. Deleted folder just recovered. There's a note." Pam read it out loud. "If they come for me, don't waste time protecting the others. Burn it all." She froze. Reyes leaned in. He knew this would happen. And he wasn't planning to go down alone. Pam looked up. Then maybe he didn't disappear. Reyes raised an eyebrow. "You think he's still here?" "No," Pam said. "I think he's buying time. For them. For the ones who still believe this network can survive." Reyes hesitated. "We're preparing a federal press release. DOJ wants a statement. Do we name names?" Pam shook her head. "Not yet. We verify everything, but we prepare." Pam stepped to the window. Outside, lights from news vans blinked against the dark sky. Reporters were already gathering for the storm. Just then her phone buzzed. Unknown number, she answered. A voice on the other end, soft and familiar. It was the young female clerk from before. "They're scrubbing the records," she whispered. "I just saw a judge's assistant shred 5 years of draft rulings. Someone tipped them off. It's spreading, you have to go faster." "Do you still have access?" Pam asked. "I can try." The call ended. Pam stood silently for a moment, then turned to Reyes. "I need a team, people we can trust, not just to find Brandt, but to follow the paper trail before it disappears forever." Reyes nodded. "We're with you." Pam took a deep breath. The moment wasn't triumphant. It wasn't even angry. It was quiet, steeled. This was her inner war, between the comfort of walking away and the cost of staying in the fight. And Pam Bondi? She was staying, because no one else had dared to. And the truth no matter how buried, was waiting to be brought into the light. The next day, the courtroom was different. It wasn't just the extra security at every door. It wasn't just the reporters packed shoulder to shoulder in the back rows, or the red recording lights blinking from every corner. It was the feeling. A heavy tension in the air. Not fear, not confusion. It was something new. Expectation. They had heard the whispers, they had seen the viral clips, but now they wanted the truth, not in secret meetings, not in leaked documents, but here, in the very room where so many had been silenced. And Pam Bondi was ready to give it to them. She entered quietly, dressed in navy this time. No cameras followed her, no entourage, just her and a slim black folder in her hand, thinner than the others, but heavier with meaning. She took her seat, second row from the front. To her left sat the girl who had started it all. She clutched a small gold cross, her mother's fingers wrapped protectively over hers. They weren't hiding anymore. At precisely 10 a.m., the back doors swung open. Judge Lucas Brandt entered. No robe, no gavel, just a suit and tie, and a face that had aged 10 years in 2 days. There was no announcement, no opening statement, just the sound of shuffling papers and the soft hum of a live stream connecting to tens of thousands of viewers. The DOJ had called for an emergency public hearing, and Brandt had agreed. Under pressure, but voluntarily. He sat behind the long desk where defendants usually sat. This time, the bench belonged to a panel of federal review officers, 3 in total, 1 from the DOJ, 1 from the Judicial Ethics Board, and 1 former federal judge, now retired, who had come out of private life for one reason only, to make sure this wasn't buried. The lead officer began. This is not a criminal proceeding at this time. This is a transparency session for public record. Judge Brandt, you are here today to answer for a documented pattern of judicial bias and religious discrimination in your courtroom. Do you understand? Brandt nodded once, his voice low. Yes. Pam watched every movement, every breath. The officer continued. We've reviewed the documents submitted by Ms. Bondi and verified through multiple independent sources. We've interviewed 3 clerks. We've recovered deleted memos and time-stamped order drafts. We have evidence that supports over 20 rulings showing intentional suppression of faith-based expressions. There was a pause. Brandt didn't look up. Do you deny these findings? The officer asked. Brandt stayed quiet, then finally, no. A gasp from the crowd, from the cameras, from the young girl sitting beside Pam. Pam leaned forward, lips tight, fists clenched. Why? The officer asked. Why target expressions of faith in your courtroom? Brandt looked up, and for the first time he looked human, tired, unarmored. He didn't defend himself. He didn't raise his voice, he told the truth. I thought I was protecting neutrality, he said. I thought I was being objective. He paused. Then I started resenting it, the symbols, the words, the things I couldn't control. I told myself it was about order, but it wasn't. It was about fear. Silence. Total. Pam didn't blink, because she knew what was coming. I let my own discomfort become policy, Brandt continued. And then I let others influence me. Outside advisors, foundation grants, political groups promising advancement if I kept the bench clean. Their words, not mine. He looked down. I didn't just fail the people in my courtroom. I failed the idea of the courtroom itself. The panel member from the ethics board leaned in. Do you understand the magnitude of what you're saying? Brandt nodded, yes. The retired judge finally spoke, her voice calm, heavy with experience. Mr. Brandt, I wore that robe for nearly 30 years. I've ruled on everything from civil suits to criminal trials. But I never once let a robe shield me from accountability. Do you believe you should still sit on the bench? Brandt looked up at her. No, he said. I don't. The panel turned to each other. One nodded. Then the lead officer spoke. Effective immediately, Lucas Brandt, you are hereby stripped of judicial authority. You will no longer preside over any legal proceeding at the state or federal level. Your bar license will be placed under disciplinary review, and this file, he said, holding up the flash drive, will be turned over to the Department of Justice for full investigation. Brandt didn't speak. He just closed his eyes, and in that moment, for the first time, he looked like a man who understood what it meant to face truth without power. Pam exhaled slowly. The courtroom broke into quiet applause, not loud, not triumphant, but the kind of slow, reverent clapping that happens when something sacred is returned. Pam stood up. She turned to the girl beside her, smiled softly, and said, "It's over." But the girl, now emboldened by what she had seen, looked back and whispered, "No, it's just beginning." And she was right, because the system had been cracked open, and the light was pouring in. And the light was pouring in. 3 days later, the courtroom was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of fear, it was reverence. The bench sat empty now, the black robe folded and boxed, no longer a symbol of power, but of what happens when power is misused. The video of the public hearing had gone viral across every platform, over 25 million views in 72 hours. The headlines stretched across news tickers and homepages. Former Judge Lucas Brandt removed after bombshell evidence. DOJ confirms investigation into National Judicial Bias Network. Let Them Pray was trending in every state. And for the first time in years, people were talking not just about corruption, but about faith, about justice, about how something as simple as a whispered prayer had ignited a movement. Outside the courthouse, flowers lined the steps, not for loss, but for gratitude, for the girl who prayed, for the mothers who didn't back down, for the whistleblowers who risked their careers, and for Pam Bondi, who didn't come seeking headlines but found herself at the center of history. She stood alone on those steps that morning, watching quietly as people gathered, not to protest, but to honor. Reporters called out to her, "Pam, what's next? Are you running for office? Will there be more hearings?" She didn't answer right away, because sometimes the best answers are actions. Instead, she walked slowly to the microphones and waited for the crowd to still. And when it did, she spoke, clearly, directly. "I didn't do this alone," she said. "I walked into a courtroom where people had been silenced for years, where faith was treated like a threat, but I wasn't the first voice to speak up. I just refused to stop when they told me to sit down." She paused, letting the words settle. The truth is, this wasn't about one judge. It wasn't even about one courtroom. It was about the slow erosion of something sacred, about what happens when power stops serving the people and starts trying to control them. She held up a small gold cross, the same one the girl had held in court, and said, "And this should never be a crime." Applause erupted, real, raw, grounded in something deeper than politics. It wasn't about sides anymore. It was about right and wrong. After the speech, Pam walked down the steps into the crowd. People hugged her. Strangers thanked her. A man handed her a copy of the Constitution with a note scribbled inside, "Thank you for defending more than law. Thank you for defending belief." She smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace, because something had shifted. That afternoon, Pam met with the Department of Justice one final time before returning home. Inside a secure conference room, she reviewed a growing list of cases being reevaluated, rulings made under Brandt, charges dropped, appeals reopened, families being notified. But there was more. The federal analyst assigned to Brandt's files had uncovered additional names. 3 more judges connected to the same private legal group, all showing similar patterns. And now the DOJ was preparing a nationwide audit of all courtrooms flagged in the network. It had begun, a ripple turning into a wave. As she left the building, Pam received a text message from the girl's mother. A photo. It showed the girl standing at her school's graduation ceremony, delivering a short speech to her classmates. In the middle of it, her hands folded, head bowed, and she prayed. No one stopped her. Pam closed her eyes for a moment, holding on to the image. This was why she came, not to win, but to make sure no child was ever made to feel ashamed of their faith again. That evening, Pam stood outside her small home in Florida, the sun dipping below the horizon. The wind was calm, the air finally quiet. She sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in one hand and the Constitution in the other, not the document itself, but the idea of it, the living, breathing promise that in America, justice still had a chance. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from the retired judge on the federal review panel. 4 words, We're just getting started." Pam looked up at the sky and smiled softly, because she knew it was true. She hadn't just exposed a problem, she had awakened a country. And somewhere out there, another courtroom waited, another voice trembled with truth, another moment, small and quiet, was ready to become something bigger. And when it did, Pam would be there, not for the spotlight, not for the headlines, but because some fights are worth having, some prayers are worth protecting, and some stories are just beginning. The story of Judge Lucas Brandt and Pam Bondi teaches us a profound lesson. When power silences the powerless, courage can break the chains of injustice. One girl's quiet prayer sparked a movement because someone refused to let truth be buried. It reminds us that faith, no matter how small, carries weight, and that standing up, even alone, can shift the world. In our lives, this means speaking out when we see wrong, even if it's uncomfortable, because silence often protects the guilty more than the innocent. It's about holding systems accountable and protecting what matters most, our beliefs, our voices, our humanity. Thank you for watching this incredible journey with us. If this story moved you, drop a like, comment, Truth Matters below, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that inspire. See you next time.